by politics editor Brian Baxt. Coming up in just a few minutes, we'll bring you live coverage of Governor Tim Walz, who's giving an update on the state's response to the ICE killing of a woman in Minneapolis. It's due to start right at 11:30. Right now, we'll likely include his reaction to this new development. We're hearing that the FBI will be investigating the incident alone, sidelining, effectively, state investigators. Again, we're waiting for it to begin. We are seeing some people walking in. All right, let's go to Governor Tim Walz.
Good morning. I'd like to start again this morning extending sympathies to Renee Good's wife and child, to the rest of the family. Deepest sympathies on an unimaginable tragedy and the horror of the last 24 hours. Also a deep thank you to Minnesotans and those across the country. I understand a fund has been set up to support Renee's 6-year-old child and wife. Other things being done. I would encourage Minnesotans and folks across the country in this moment. You're seeing neighborliness and kindness rise to the occasion. Is go and find out what they're doing there and give some help if you can. I'd also say last night we saw Minnesotans meet the moment once again. Thousands of Minnesotans demonstrated last night peacefully. They shared a message about the reckless ICE mobilization is not keeping us safe and led to the tragedy that the world witnessed once again. To Minnesota, I say thank you. There's strength in numbers, there's power in peace, and what we saw was a beautiful vigil to a life that we're starting to learn more about. And I will let those that want to push out false narratives, to slander or defame Renee Good, Minnesotans will tell her life story. Minnesotans will be there to defend her honor and see this as a human being, not a moment in time or the callous casualness that I've watched some people on TV gloss over what they saw. We've also spent a lot of time talking last 24 hours about accountability. That means no function of government operates with impunity. It means when someone's in a position of authority and they commit any act that impacts our people, there has to be another place to turn to get justice. Checks and balances. Basic idea, the center of the formation of our country. It's the only measure that protects us from the abuse of government or federal overreach or tyrannical government. Yesterday, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA, spent the day yesterday attempting to get that accountability. We have learned that the Trump administration has now denied the state that ability to participate in the investigation. And I just want to make this as clear as possible to everyone. Minnesota must be part of this investigation. These are nonpartisan career professionals that have spent years building the trust of the community. There's a BCA Force Investigations Unit that was created by the legislature, by the people of Minnesota, to provide an independent, consistent, and trusted mechanism for investigating the use of force incidents involving law enforcement officers. Minnesota has seen our share of these. And what you've seen is, and I have witnessed it during my time, that these professionals have risen to the moment. They are trusted by people. People who are not by inclination trusting of law enforcement or government have come to see the professionals at the BCA as true arbitrators that can get them justice. The unit is the result of years of scrutiny, public engagement, and bipartisan legislative action. Minnesotans have made it clear time and again they expect transparency through this process where a police officer uses deadly force. The BCA, Superintendent Evans, have earned that trust by delivering on that expectation. I think it's clear to everyone as they saw this that it feels now that Minnesota has been taken out of the investigation. It feels very, very difficult that we will get a fair outcome. And I say that only because people in positions of power have already passed judgment, from the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem, have stood and told you things that are verifiably false. verifiably inaccurate. They have determined the character of a 37-year-old mom that they didn't even don't know. They've determined that the actions are done. I don't know. I've not used inflammatory terms of what happened. I've asked us to find the answers. The only way we find the answers is a thorough investigation by nonpartisan professionals. We've delivered that. We've been able to do it. We've earned the trust. And when I say that, the trust of BCA, and I tell Minnesotans the trust of law enforcement here. Everyone knows, globally, certainly here, that George Floyd, who was murdered a few blocks from this site, tore at the soul of who we were. But we healed. We built back trust. Chief Brian O'Hara came in and took one of the most difficult jobs in America of building back trust in the police force in Minneapolis after Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And he's earned that. And he's level. And he's fair. And he's asking for that. And so, Minnesotans, I will continue to press that we be part of the investigation so that Minnesotans can trust what the outcome is. I don't have a predetermined notion. Yes, I saw the video. Yes, I saw that. But a thorough investigation will see what happened before that. It will take all factors in, and it will come up with a fair and just conclusion. And we will accept that. Very, very difficult for Minnesotans to think in any way this is going to be fair when Kristi Noem was judge, jury, and basically executioner yesterday. That's very, very difficult to think that they were going to be fair. With that being said, Minnesotans, we've risen to the occasion so far, but it's going to get challenging. It's going to be challenging because I feel your anger. The human desire to lash out in this moment is very real. I can tell you that that is the wish of many people, that they fulfill the wish they want to see us turn on one another, turn towards violence rather than peaceful reconciliation, rather than peaceful civil disobedience. And we have to do our best to not play into that. I say this too when I saw yesterday some of the anger, whether it's Minneapolis Police, Minnesota State Patrol, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, Minnesota National Guard. They are there to protect and serve, as it said. They are there to protect Minnesotans. Throwing your anger at them only inflames this situation. And I know some of you were up at the Whipple building this morning, and to the press who are here, I saw some of this myself. Thank you. Continue to have access to every single space. Continue to cover this story. Continue to show the world what's out there. I will say it where our president won't. The press are the defenders of our democracy. You need to be there. But I also tell folks, protect our Minnesotans who are out there and don't turn the anger to them. This is a brazen use of force. They want us to bend the knee. They want us to capitulate. The way we give them what they want is allow them to use this as an excuse to put more troops on the ground. Use them as an excuse to show that these are violent protests. And I also witnessed what I think is going to be a pattern over the next few days and the coming hours, is I saw an individual show up there with the intent to antagonize folks who were peacefully protesting, with a bullhorn to scream at them. And again, the desire to move on that individual is exactly what they want, because our respect for the First Amendment means we will expect and respect all opinions. If this individual is there expressing support for ICE, that's their constitutional right to do so, and they need to be protected. Don't allow that to be a catalyst to create violence. We believe in states' rights. We believe the federal government needs to stay out of this. We believe that the situation has gotten worse and less safe because of presence. And I will just say there were two incidents yesterday I saw after this that just tore at my soul. I saw an individual at the scene identify themselves as medical personnel, a physician, and asked to provide aid, and an ICE agent said, "I do not care." That lack of humanity was chilling to me. And after this incident happened, and after the tensions rose, ICE agents entered a Minnesota school, causing disruptions at that school. I can't say this strongly enough as governor, as a parent, as a teacher, To our elected representatives, Democrats and Republicans, I beg you, I implore you to tell them to stay out of our schools. Tragedy will be magnified 100-fold if this fight moves into the hallways of our public schools amongst our youth. And they're watching us. They're watching us now, how we respond. So I've got a few simple asks. Let us, the professionals, handle this on Minnesota soil, this investigation. De-escalate this situation by removing yourselves from this situation with these 2,000 agents that were put here. And above all else, stay out of our schools. I'd like to ask you to care, but that might be a step too far for some people. But I know Minnesotans care. So we'll protest peacefully. We will win in courts. We will certainly win in the defense of our democracy because the American people see what's happening here. But the way that we don't win and the way that we lose, if this turns towards violence and allows them to escalate, it cannot happen. So I ask the grass top leaders out there, the faith leaders, the folks who are on the streets, and in many times the true leaders are not the elected officials, they're the folks on the ground. I beg you, in words of the leaders we've had, I had the privilege of serving with John Lewis. And John talked about good trouble. I'm not telling you not to find good trouble. But I asked John many times, I said, John, I don't know if I'd have your self-restraint. Didn't you want to lash out? He said, yes, daily. But he said, I wanted to win this. I wanted to do what's right, and I wanted justice to prevail. And to do that, I knew the only way was to not lash out, to not give in to that. So to each and every one of you, we're not going to win this through violence. We're going to win it through justice. We're going to win it through compassion. We're going to win it through Minnesota Nice. And we're going to hold every one of these people accountable as they should for what we've seen on the streets of Minneapolis. With that, I'm going to turn to Commissioner Jacobson to give you a situation update.
Thank you, Governor. Again, I'm Bob Jacobson, and it is my honor to serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety. First of all, again, I want to express my sincere condolences to the loved ones of Renee Nicole Good. Someone has lost their life, and that is not something that anyone takes lightly. Minnesotans came out yesterday to express their grief, their frustration, and their anger at this terrible tragedy. I expect that they will continue to come out today. And I want to thank everyone who demonstrated peacefully. This helped honor Renee's memory and gave her family space to mourn. Minnesota's residents and visitors have the right to demonstrate and to exercise their First Amendment rights. I want to remind everyone that there are safe ways to do so. Our goal is to reduce tensions, to avoid conflict, and to maintain a calm environment. As I mentioned yesterday, we recommend the following safe and lawful ways to demonstrate. Please get together peacefully with others in public areas where pedestrians are allowed. March or walk together in pedestrian areas, please, not on the roadways. Make your voice heard through chants, speeches, and displaying signs. And there are a few things I just want to mention very quickly that are unsafe. Because as always, our top priority is public safety, and we cannot allow behaviors that create hazards, threaten public safety, or disrupt emergency services or endanger people nearby. That would include certainly demonstrating on the freeway, walking on highways, throwing objects, setting things on fire, property damage, graffiti, fireworks, illegal weapons, reckless and dangerous driving, or assaultive or aggressive behavior. I know that we all want more definitive answers about that fatal shooting that occurred yesterday. And as we are able to get those answers and dispel rumors and false information, then we can rightfully honor Renee's memory and help her family, loved ones, and our community heal. With that, I'll turn it back to Governor Walz and maybe a few questions.
Please. Right. Esme? I have not. As I said yesterday, I did speak to Secretary Noem, and received a lot of points. I will note that I asked Secretary Noem how she would have felt if President Biden had sent 2,000 troops into Rapid City, South Dakota, and she said she would have welcomed them. I leave that for the folks of South Dakota to determine. I've not spoken to the president. I would ask him, first of all, the goal here is to make America safe, is what he said. There is no verifiable evidence that any of this is making America safer. I would ask him to de-escalate in the moment, to allow Minnesotans to back up and grieve, to allow this investigation to be played out by the rule of law. I said it again, I have not passed any judgment on this. And to please, whatever it is, leave Minnesota alone. Earlier this week, I don't know if it was if something he wanted or I've already made it clear. I'm exiting the stage here in a year. But I told him I have a year to continue to do what I love dearly and what I believe I've been good at, making Minnesota a better place to live. The number of calls we got today of parents asking if they should send their kids to school or not. Minneapolis had to make what I believe was the absolute correct decision to cancel school. We have students out of learning today. I would just ask him, I'm not talking anything about border security. I'm not talking anything about what he needs to do on that. None of this is accomplishing either his mission or making us any safer. So just give us a pause. Let us breathe. Look, we're exhausted. We're exhausted as Minnesotans. We're exhausted as Americans. And this relentless assault on Minnesota, for whatever reason, is just cruel now. It has reached cruelness. So please, just give us a break. And if it's me, you're already getting what you want. But leave my people alone. Leave our state alone. And look again and see what's happening. It's not me saying it. You're hearing it from many others. So that's what I would say.
Governor Walz and Commissioner Jacobson, is there anything stopping state and local law enforcement from conducting an independent investigation of this, even if the federal government does not want to have you have a joint investigation?
So, great question. We have asked for cooperation from the federal government. We were invited in to do a joint investigation on this initially. We continue to work with the federal government all the time on joint investigations. This is not something new, whether it be with the FBI or other federal law enforcement agencies, so we are accustomed to doing joint investigations. As the governor has mentioned, our force investigative unit within the BCA has a stellar reputation for doing quality investigations, for finding the answers to the questions that people have. There are so many questions out there that I know the public has from watching what's been shown on social media and regular media. And the goal for me would be to provide an investigation, preferably in tandem with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because we work with them all the time, and they do have all the evidence in the original investigative notes and reports. We have none of that. They have shared none of that with us. We would welcome the opportunity to jump back in, to do that investigation, use our high-quality investigators from the BCA to be able to do that with them, to find the answers that the public deserves. Without any of that information, or without any of that assistance from the FBI or the federal government, we would be at a loss to be able to initiate and conduct a thorough investigation. For us to be able to do that, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, without cooperation from the federal government.
How difficult would it be to file state charges without the cooperation of the FBI?
To be able to file state charges, we would need, again, a full investigation, which would include the opportunity to have been at the crime scene, to have had the opportunity to take a look at all the video and evidence that the FBI would have in their possession. I don't make any prejudgments about what happened yesterday. We can all see what we want to see on the videos and what we have seen in the media. That doesn't mean that none of us, I will not, as a public safety professional, jump to any conclusions as to who is at fault in this. What I will say, though, is that unless we do that thorough investigation, unless we have access to all of that evidence, unless we have access to the agents that were involved in that, to any witnesses, Without any of that, we would not be able to put together a quality investigation for any prosecutor to be able to make a determination as to whether or not someone should be charged with a crime.
I'm going to note on this too that no one less than Tom Holman yesterday said it would be unprofessional to pass judgment ahead of time. Now, the disconnect between what Tom Holman said and Kristi Noem said needs to be rectified by the federal government. I will note too, this is a question I asked, not being an attorney of my team, and it will go to the family, that there will certainly be civil cases filed on this, and those will be filed in Minnesota court and be held in court. Corn?
What is standard operating procedure when a federal agent of any kind in Minnesota shot and killed somebody, a civilian? Are you usually involved? Is there usually a joint investigation?
Generally, if there is any investigation involving use by a federal officer, generally the federal government, federal officials will lead that investigation. We have participated in numerous investigations in the past. It is very infrequent where there's a use of force by law enforcement officer, federal law enforcement officer, but we have worked jointly and shared information in previous investigations.
I'd like to say, I'm going to add on this. I'm going to say, if you truly wanted to de-escalate this situation, the logical conclusion would be to follow that procedure and allow Minnesota to participate. And that's where we started yesterday, and it's one of the reasons I came out here, and I'm not going to criticize that because that was the proper process, and I'm going to have to talk to Minnesotans to try, and it's a very difficult task. I think we all know what can happen here, to calmly wait until all the facts come out. I think you in this room are seeing the gravity of this situation by not allowing Minnesota to participate, and the prejudgment that's already been made by leadership creates a very, very dangerous situation. And that's why, once again, I'm going to reiterate to our federal partners, simply let us be part of this. Use our professional folks. They will gain you the credibility and the trust of Minnesotans to believe the work that you're doing is honest, and it's not just a whitewash to backfill a predeceived notion. All right, so I got time for...
Is there anything that the state can do to put in additional protection around schools or to allow for additional e-learning days for these situations?
Yeah, it's interesting, Dana, that you would ask that. We were just, as we were coming in here discussing, someone asked about that, and they mentioned Ruby Bridges and the Little Rock folks about escorting people in. We have not determined that yet, but it is a situation that we're going to have to explore. As I said, again, the thing that cut me deeply was watching what happened in our schools and the chaos, and I was on with Commissioner Jett this morning as he's talking to folks from St. Cloud to Duluth about what they think about today. Should we be in classes today and tomorrow in those schools, or does it pose a potential risk? And so we're trying to figure that out. I think many of the things and the lessons we learned during COVID is local communities and local schools being able to make some of these decisions in the long run probably gets us better outcomes, but we are deeply concerned with that. I'm going to come back as soon as we get any more information from all of you. We'll be in front of you again. I will reiterate, and many of you know my wife, Gwen, the First Lady, is an English and literature teacher, and we were talking about some of this, and she got asked the question, and it was when will all of this end? And what Gwen said, it will end when enough people say it will end. And I think that is sage advice. And then I couldn't help but thinking, and it scares me a little bit, I heard those words. We remembered, many of us in here in sophomore, when we read it, that the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most important directive. It certainly feels like that in this moment. And so I want Minnesotans to not believe that I'm telling you not to be angry, not to be scared, not to be feeling a little bit hopeless in this moment. But I would also say this, and I saw it last night, I saw it during George Floyd, I've seen it throughout our history. When things looked really bleak, it was Minnesota's first that held that line for the nation on that July 3rd, 1863. And I think now we may be in that moment that the nation's looking to us to hold the line on democracy, to hold the line on decency, to hold the line on accountability, and more than that, to rise up as neighbors and simply say, we can look out for one another. We can have differences. But we've proved to the world going on 250 years that our democracy could hold. It feels to me like we're at one of those inflection points. That simply asking our government to give us accountability, listen to local leaders, ratchet down the rhetoric, let people feel safe in their person, and let's let our kids go to school without fear. Let's let our kids go to school knowing that tomorrow could be a little better day. And so we're going to work on that. I'll leave you with this, and I'm not sure when we'll get in front of you next, but to Minnesotans, again, just one last time, don't give them what they want. Don't give them the unrest that they want. Don't give in to allowing them to bring more folks in here. Don't allow them to expand this somewhere else. Rise up, wrap your arms around your neighbors, peacefully express your First Amendment and your constitutional rights, and let's start healing, get some answers, and move Minnesota forward. Thank you.
I'm Nina Moyni. You're listening to live special coverage on NPR News. Governor Tim Walz there reacting to the latest from the FBI and the federal government, saying that the FBI alone will be investigating the case of the killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent that happened in Minneapolis yesterday. The governor saying, please give us a break and please let us, meaning Minnesota, be part of the investigation. Our Dana Ferguson was in the room for this news conference and got some questions in. Hi, Dana. Oh, it looks like we don't have Dana. My apologies. Well, luckily we have Brian Baxt, our political editor, right here in the studio with me. You know, Dana's probably very busy right now, but
she is.
What stood out to you there? He was talking a lot about upholding democracy at the end, Brian.
That's right. And we first heard about this about 2 hours ago, that the FBI had sidelined the BCA, and the governor said he hopes this isn't the final decision. He says he worries that people will feel like this is whitewashed because the president and the Homeland Security secretary have already come out and essentially exonerated this agent in their eyes. And so even today, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was in New York, basically reiterating that they felt that this person, Renee Good, was acting in bad faith. Was she again repeating this very controversial line that domestic terrorism was taking place? And so the governor says that we need to have Minnesota involved in the investigation. And that's also important because if Minnesota is not involved in this investigation, there's really not a way for Minnesota prosecutors to consider any charges. So that would be entirely up to the federal government to consider whether this agent, if he acted recklessly, is held to account.
We've just about a minute left here. Our Dana Ferguson is in the room right now. Let's go to her. Let's go to her for just a minute here if we can. Dana, are you still there?
Hi, Nina. Yes, I'm here.
Dana, you got that last question. And what can the governor actually do about all of this? And we only have about a minute left.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, he essentially is just asking for peace from folks who are here on the ground in Minnesota, urging them to demonstrate in a way that doesn't turn to violence. And he says he's asking the federal government, President Trump, Secretary Noem, to reconsider to let Minnesota law enforcement be a part of this investigation. He says that folks who are here on the ground in Minnesota, in terms of the BCA, Department of Public Safety, others are trusted. And if this investigation is to go forward, he says that it would be beneficial to have those individuals involved rather than the perception that there might be stones left unturned in this investigation if just the FBI is
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dana Ferguson. We will check back in with you in just a couple of minutes, but we are going to take a quick break for some news and top news and weather headlines for you. Join us. Stay with us for Minnesota Now in just a couple minutes.
Support comes from Lyric Arts, presenting the musical Ride the Cyclone. Quirky and inventive, it's a wild ride through what it truly means to live. On stage in downtown Anoka, January 16th through February 8th. Info and tickets at lyricarts.org.
You're listening to NPR News 91.1 FM KNOW, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Cloudy. 34 degrees right now here in the Twin Cities. There is going to be maybe some fog and some rain that's going to be likely with these cloudy skies this evening. So do look out for some rain, maybe some snow in the southeast. Also looking here ahead to your Friday. Tomorrow is Friday. It'll be sunny skies. Highs will be in the low 30s, so that's looking nice. Saturday, there is a chance for some snow in the morning. But good news again, on Sunday, it's looking like it'll be sunny, highs in the mid-20s. Sunday looking like the better day of the weekend days. It's noon. This is Minnesota Now. I'm Nina Moini. We are following the developing story of the ICE shooting in South Minneapolis. We'll take you to a vigil that is memorializing Renee Good, the woman who died in the shooting, and we'll have the latest as well from the scene, which has now been barricaded and blocked off by the public. The state of Minnesota has now been sidelined from the investigation by the federal government. We'll have the latest, and we'll talk to the mayor of the city of Chicago, where ICE has also surged, and where nearby there have also been incidents of people being shot by ICE agents. Plus, we'll look at the legal precedent for an investigation into this shooting. All that and more is headed your way after these top news headlines. Stay with us.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. In Minnesota, ICE out now! ICE out now! Protests continue in Minneapolis for another day after 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good was shot and killed by an ICE agent while in her car yesterday. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem today again defended the ICE agent, saying he was just doing his job. Yesterday, she said Good drove at the agent, which local and state officials dispute. Meanwhile, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has issued an order to prepare the state's National Guard for deployment. NPR's Kat Lonsdorf has more.
Governor Walz, a Democrat, issued a warning order for Minnesota's National Guard, putting them on standby for a possible deployment. At a press conference in Minneapolis following the shooting, Walz stressed that the troops remain under state control.
I remind you, a warning order is a heads up for folks. And these National Guard troops are our National Guard troops.
In recent months, President Trump has federalized several other states' National Guard troops, often against the wishes of Democratic governors, and deployed them to protect federal immigration officials and property. Walz spoke to Trump directly in the press conference, saying Minnesota does not need any more involvement from the federal government. Kat Lonsdorf, NPR News, Washington.
The Senate today voted to advance a resolution requiring the Trump administration to secure congressional approval before taking further military action in Venezuela. The measure needed just a simple majority and cleared the chamber by a vote of 52-47, with 5 Republicans joining Democrats to advance the measure. It's a procedural step to start debate on a final passage, though a final vote hasn't yet been scheduled. On social media, Trump slammed Republicans who voted for it, calling it a war powers act unconstitutional. Now, the bill would face a steep climb in the GOP-controlled House and a likely veto from President Trump. Meanwhile, American military forces are now escorting an oil tanker to the U.S. after a 2-week chase. This is part of a U.S. crackdown on ghost ships transporting oil from Venezuela. NPR's Greg Myrie reports.
The U.S. forces prepared to seize the Bella 1 oil tanker in the Caribbean in late December as it was heading to Venezuela to pick up oil. But the tanker refused to halt. Instead, it changed course and headed out to the Atlantic with U.S. forces in pursuit. Somewhere along the way, the tanker changed its name from the Bella 1 to the Marinera and also changed its flag from that of Guyana to Russia. U.S. troops boarded the ship Wednesday in the North Atlantic between Britain and Iceland. Now in American custody, the ship and the crew are headed to the U.S. The U.S. has seized 4 oil tankers linked to Venezuela since this campaign began last month. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
And you're listening to NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance, working to help protect small businesses and the owners that run them, offering customizable coverages to salons, accounting firms, tradespeople, and more. Learn more at progressivecommercial.com.
Our top story on Minnesota Now, Governor Walz just reacting, Governor Tim Walz, to the decision by the federal government to have the FBI solely investigate the fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Good by an ICE agent yesterday in South Minneapolis. There are many questions. There are many differing interpretations and accounts of what has happened, which is why it's so important to narrow down who will be investigating this case at either the state or the federal level, and who will be able to decide whether or not to bring forward criminal charges to the ICE agent who has not yet been identified. I'm joined in the studio with politics editor Brian Bax. Thanks for being here, Brian.
Hi, Nina.
And we're happy to have politics reporter Dana Ferguson on the phone. They're from the room where she was just at the news conference. Thanks for being here, Dana.
You're welcome.
Dana, it was striking to hear the governor saying, please just leave us alone, essentially. It sounded a little bit like begging and pleading at this point. What was your takeaway from that news conference?
Right. I think one of my biggest takeaways was just watching the governor sort of process a lot of this news in real time. We'd just heard from the feds not too long before this speech that they are going to be taking over the investigation. Previously, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension was supposed to be part of it. We heard from public safety officials that they have concerns about not being involved, not having the same capacity to get evidence in this case and what it'll mean for them in terms of being able to make state or county charging decisions. And the governor just seemed really bordering between anger and frustration and, frankly, sadness. There were a couple times that he teared up a little bit, but didn't break into tears. Just the level of frustration that's come this week in a series of big moments for the state, and feeling as though Minnesota is really under the pressure of the eye of the federal government.
And Nina, the one thing that the governor did say today, he has not yet spoken with President Donald Trump, as sometimes happens when these major incidents occur within a state. He did speak with Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem yesterday, and he said he communicated to her that the president should de-escalate and give the state space to grieve. You know, we've had this 2,000 agents, according to federal officials, that have come in to Minnesota to do various kinds of immigration enforcement and fraud investigation. It's all kind of tied together. But, of course, the big takeaway was that Minnesota has been, as you've mentioned, sidelined in this investigation, which means that there's some questions over whether the public is going to trust the outcome. And so it's all adding to this unstable situation that we have, because the governor is pleading for calm, but knows that people want answers, they want accountability, and if they don't feel like they're going to get that, they might lash out.
Dana, did you have a sense at all for what the governor could do about this? He seemed to just be asking and making asks. What else is there?
Yeah, it's not clear that the state has quite enough authority to intervene in this decision at the federal level beyond asking that the FBI or Department of Homeland Security, that the Trump administration more broadly allow the state to have some sort of say, some sort of involvement in an investigation, or at least to have the information that would allow them to do a state investigation concurrently with the federal investigation. So at this point, he essentially said it feels as though the state is being boxed out with something that is obviously very present, very impactful here on the ground that people are living with right now, and just frustrated at that situation.
Dana, I wanted to ask you about a question that you actually posed to the governor about the situation around school buildings. We saw some federal enforcement actions at high schools in Minneapolis yesterday. Minneapolis has, of course, canceled classes for the remainder of the week, but there is some concern about other districts in the area and what the state can or maybe should do. What did the governor tell you?
Yeah, he said that the state is still working on exactly what would be the right course here. They're turning back to some of the decision-making that took place during the COVID-19 era regarding e-learning, allowing some flexibility there. He said it's important, and they think at this point that it's the right decision to allow school districts to make these decisions at the local level, decide what the right move will be for them. We saw that obviously from Minneapolis schools last night, coming into today and tomorrow. But he also noted that they've been hearing from a lot of concerned parents, concerned school district leaders about whether it is safe to have kids go back to schools when there is this enhanced ICE presence in the Twin Cities and potentially going out to other parts of the state, and they're still grappling with exactly what that means and what the right move is for the state to step in, if there is anything that the state can really do.
So yeah, Dana, to your point, there is the issue in the situation surrounding schools now. And there are also questions about, for people who don't know, what is the role of the state in something like this? What is the role of the Federal Bureau of Investigations? Brian, why can't the state just do its own thing, regardless of what the federal government says?
Yeah, and that was a question that Department of Public Safety Commissioner Bob Jacobson hit on, is that they don't have access to the scene. They don't have access to some of these reports that came out, or, interviews that might have been done with witnesses or other officers on the scene at the moment. So he said it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to conduct a full investigation. And those are the types of materials you need if you're going to be presenting this to a prosecutor, whether that be a county prosecutor or the Attorney General's office, to decide whether the state would bring any charges. Without that, you really don't have much to go with.
Yeah, and there also was the idea of, again, asking people and stressing to please keep any demonstrations or protests peaceful. Obviously, Minnesotans know that in 2020, the killing of George Floyd, the unrest and the uprising that happened then, many of these same public officials, Brian, as we know, are in this same situation. Not obviously the same situation, but they're the same people. And they're trying to really, I think, connect with the public and say, please do not give President Trump or anyone in the federal government any more reason to send any more law enforcement
Yeah,
here.
we've heard it from Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who was in office at the time. We heard it from Governor Tim Walz, who was in office at the time. And the person they're having trouble communicating with is President Donald Trump, who was in office at the time. So the same players, and they're hoping, the Minnesota leaders are hoping for a far different outcome. Those days after the George Floyd murder were very tense. There was a lot of damage, a lot of confrontation, a lot of violence around the city of Minneapolis for days and nights.
And years, really. Truly, people are still
They're still
recovering
rebuilding,
from what
yes,
happened.
yeah.
So that was obviously a very serious time.
Not
This
far
is
away
a
from the
serious
same
time.
site, yeah.
Tim Walz saying, calling on Minnesotans to uphold and be on the front lines, basically, of democracy peacefully. Let's play an excerpt, a little bit of what he said for people who may have just joined us for the noon hour.
Yesterday, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA, spent the day yesterday attempting to get that accountability. We have learned that the Trump administration has now denied the state that ability to participate in the investigation. And I just want to make this as clear as possible to everyone. Minnesota must be part of this investigation. These are nonpartisan career professionals that have spent years building the trust of the community. There's a BCA Force Investigations Unit that was created by the legislature, by the people of Minnesota, to provide an independent, consistent, and trusted mechanism for investigating the use of force incidents involving law enforcement officers. Minnesota has seen our share of these. And what you've seen is, and I have witnessed it during my time, that these professionals have risen to the moment. They are trusted by people. People who are not by inclination trusting of law enforcement or government have come to see the professionals at the BCA as true arbitrators that can get them justice. The unit is the result of years of scrutiny, public engagement, and bipartisan legislative action. Minnesotans have made it clear time and again they expect transparency through this process where a police officer uses deadly force. The BCA, Superintendent Evans, have earned that trust by delivering on that expectation. I think it's clear to everyone as they saw this that it feels now that Minnesota has been taken out of the investigation. It feels very, very difficult that we will get a fair outcome. And I say that only because people in positions of power have already passed judgment, from the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem, have stood and told you things that are verifiably false, verifiably inaccurate. They have determined the character of a 37-year-old mom that they didn't even don't know. They've determined that the actions are done. I don't know I've not used inflammatory terms of what happened. I've asked us to find the answers. The only way we find the answers is a thorough investigation by nonpartisan professionals. We've delivered that. We've been able to do it. We've earned the trust. And when I say that, the trust of BCA, and I tell Minnesotans the trust of law enforcement here. Everyone knows, globally, certainly here, that George Floyd, who was murdered a few blocks from this site, tore at the soul of who we were. But we healed. We built back trust.
Listening there to Governor Tim Walz again, reacting to news that the FBI is solely going to be investigating the fatal shooting by an ICE agent that took the life of 37-year-old Renee Good. We still have Dana Ferguson on the line. Dana, I know you're up in Blaine right now at the Emergency Operations Center. And in the tape we heard there from the governor, he talked a lot about 2020. Brian and I were talking about it ahead of playing that. What strikes you about where you are and the preparation that you see happening?
Yeah, obviously very different from what we experienced in 2020 following the murder of George Floyd, when we were more centrally located back at the old State Emergency Operations Center that at the time was in downtown St. Paul. Spent a lot of time there over the course of the investigation and learning more about that situation as civil unrest was unfolding. Quite quaint here out at the very new center here in Blaine. I can see some deer wandering in a field outside the window. But just a very similar feeling, a very similar sense of tension that the governor and state officials are trying to navigate here, trying to ensure that folks don't act out in anger in a way that would be violent, instead encouraging peaceful demonstrations, civil disobedience, whatever it might be, but just urging them, as we've said, not to escalate and not to act in any sort of a way that would instruct the Trump administration to bring in National Guard troops from other states to quell the situation here in an act that potentially could, again, escalate the situation in Minnesota.
Dana, the governor opened his remarks by talking about Renee Good, the 37-year-old woman who died in this attack, in this shooting, and he said that he's worried that there's been some callousness and perhaps slander or aimed at her. What did he have to say about her?
Yeah, he spoke about how she is a mom of a 6-year-old, a daughter, a beloved community member who is going to be lost in Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. And he really raised concerns about the way that the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, has been speaking about Good, about being sort of an agitator who engaged in domestic terrorism and what she was doing, and just said that there shouldn't be this prejudgment about her actions or about her as a person before there's an adequate investigation into what happened, and more about Good's character, not just one action or one perception of an action that took place yesterday.
Another thing that's been top of mind in recent weeks with this kind of increased presence of ICE, and I think Governor Walz was using that 2,000 figure that we have been hearing about how many agents have been in the area. But yeah, just talking about, the idea that Renee Good has already been sort of talked about in the court of public opinion, so to speak, the misinformation out there, the disinformation out there. Brian, what do you think about that? Because that could interact legally as well with the case, with the investigation. But that is something we're seeing a lot more. He says, wait for an investigation, but there's already different pictures are online and just misinformation everywhere.
Well, the narratives were starting to build even before we knew Renee Good's name.
Right.
The administration was talking about this, as Dana mentioned, as an act of domestic terrorism. And Kristi Noem talked about that again today. She was in New York City, and in a meeting with reporters, she was talking about how the officer, in her view, acted according to his training. And she said that these officers had been followed all day. This was early in the morning, of course, and that they had been harassed and obstructed. And she did share one bit of information that we hadn't really heard before, and will definitely need to do some more reporting to get to the bottom of. But she said that this wasn't even the first interaction with Good that day. So that was some bit of new information. She said there will be a timeline that will be coming out in the days ahead. But she said that this officer was fired to protect himself and others around. And clearly, a lot of people have seen the videos. We encourage people to go look on our digital platforms so they can see the videos themselves.
That's a really good point, Brian. Again, nprnews.org. We have some video for people to go and assess from different angles. There are a lot of different videos that have been surfacing, but we took the time to verify who it came from through our photojournalist who received that, because in this day and age, as we know, that's incredibly important to be trying to verify every single thing. Dana, we have just about a couple minutes left. What was your impression of what is next? He came out, he said, please leave us alone. It didn't really seem like there were any actionable steps that were mentioned. And then he said he didn't know when the next briefing would be. So what was your takeaway about what is coming?
Our sense is that this whole situation is very fluid. We know that Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt and the Vice President, J.D. Vance, are going to be talking about this shortly, if they're not talking about it right now. So there will likely be a response from Governor Walz and others in Minnesota to what they say if they address this topic, if there are additional federal actions that they might need to respond to. And in closing, the governor really made the point that he hopes that Minnesota can be decent, can be the folks who uphold democracy in this trying moment, and just putting a lot of hope on the people to engage peacefully and respectfully at this time.
Yeah, the governor really did thank people for acting peacefully last night, and he hopes it keeps up.
Dana Ferguson, we'll let you go and get back to your busy reporting. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Nina.
Brian Bax is going to stay with me, but we're going to go to this story. Multiple protests around the state are in the works, like we mentioned today, after Renee Good was shot and killed by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent yesterday morning. Hundreds gathered outside the federal office building near the Twin Cities airport this morning. And last night, thousands of people gathered at 34th in Portland and South Minneapolis, where Good was killed. NPR's Erica Zurich was at the vigil, and she has more.
Rise up, take a stand. The crowd stretched several blocks on Portland Avenue and chanted in unison. Some people held ice out signs. Candles glowed from glove-covered hands. The mood was somber, and emotions were on display as speakers boldly demanded justice and the prosecution of the agent responsible for shooting Good. Michelle Braley was there. She says she's angry and sad.
I'm glad that, we have the attention that we do tonight, but this has been weeks of violence in our community and tearing families apart.
Renee Nicole Good was 37 years old and behind the wheel of a parked Honda Pilot when an ICE officer yelled at her to get out of the car. As she drove away, another ICE officer fired into the vehicle. Good died moments later. Simia Osman lives in Minneapolis. She says she's feeling numb and disgusted and says it's scary what's going on across the state.
We're being targeted, and this is not acceptable. An innocent woman, Renee Nicole Good, just got killed for no reason. I want her to rest in peace, and I want our city and our nation to wake up. Things are going to get worse than this. If an innocent woman can be gunned down in the daylight, get the hell out of our city and our state.
The killing of Good has reopened scars from the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police that happened in a nearby neighborhood. Sean Powell Burns lives close by. He says it's terrible, and it doesn't feel like a coincidence that they're pressing so hard on Minneapolis, given the response that George Floyd yielded.
It's abhorrent, of course, but unfortunately it's also not surprising at this point. We're pretty used to ICE raising hell. We're just here to be bodies as much as we can.
Federal immigration enforcement efforts ramped up across Minnesota in December. It stoked fear and distress among many state residents and business owners. People are on guard and afraid. Conjure Devant's parents were veterans, and they taught her that it's important to protect the things she believes in.
I've shown up in ways that a lot of people don't feel comfortable with, and trying to put myself out there in a helping people who are too scared to go out and do things. And so when I see somebody who has been very outgoing and very vocal about trying to document what's happening, get killed, it's just heartbreaking.
Homeland Security officials are defending the federal agent that shot and killed Good. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and Governor Tim Walz pushed back on the narrative that officers were justified in using deadly force. Minneapolis Public Schools canceled school today and Friday due to safety concerns amid federal immigration presence in the city. But Wednesday night, as the crowd dispersed and neighbors hugged, Lori Flanagan Heggie says she's here to be a messenger of love and solidarity.
These are all neighbors that I'm here with on my street, and our street has only gotten more loving since the unrest when George Floyd was killed, and our community has gotten stronger, and I feel like we are all kind of deeply committed to demonstrating our community, demonstrating our love for each other, showing up for each other, and not being afraid to say that this is unacceptable.
Those gathered at the vigil say they'll keep showing up to support the family of Renee Nicole Good and all their neighbors who are being taken off the street by ICE. Erica Zurich, NPR News, Minneapolis.
A memorial is now up where Renee Good died. It's near the intersection of 34th Street and Portland Avenue in Minneapolis. The block where she was killed is closed off with barricades and community members who are gathering in the area. Our Ellie Roth is there now. Hi, Ellie.
Hey, Nina, how are you?
I'm good. I hope you're doing okay as well. We've got Brian Baxt here as well in the studio. We just had a story learning more about Renee Good, but it does seem like these tributes are just beginning to grow. Can you describe a little bit about where you are and what you're seeing?
Yeah, I'm on Portland Avenue, right where Renee Nicole Good was killed yesterday morning. There is a large gathering here. Many, many different faith leaders from around the Twin Cities. They're speaking, they're calling for justice. And there's a much smaller gathering of, listeners, protesters, people just here to pay their respects. It is probably about 100 or so folks who are here gathered around this memorial that has, come up where Renee Nicole Good's car ended up yesterday. Mm-hmm. Lots and lots of flowers, lots and lots of candles, lots of signs, lots of notes, and some rosaries, some crosses. It just seems to be growing with every minute. I keep seeing people walking up with small bouquets of flowers to lay on the spot where she passed away.
And Ellie, are these people who know her, or are they just strangers who are sympathetic to the cause and to her and the situation that now awaits her family?
So far, I haven't met anyone who personally knows Renee Nicole Good. I think that speaks to the community here. A lot of people said they just feel the need to gather here and listen. Lots of people here listening to these faith leaders. I've talked to some folks who've taken off of work to come down here and pay their respects, and it's people right now are just listening to leaders of all different religions. Lots of camera crews here too, and just a very solemn, sad mood here on 34th and Portland.
And Nina, as we often see in these times, there's a GoFundMe that came together very shortly after her killing. It had a goal initially of $50,000. I'm looking at it right now. It's up to $681,000, and it's like a slot machine going with all the new donations that are still rolling in.
Yeah. Ellie, sometimes after incidents where someone dies, like you mentioned, there will be a vigil. We're also hearing, and I know you're seeing, the area being barricaded and closed off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a different, level of demonstration that seems to be growing. And that we've seen that with other incidents over time, most notably what's now known as George Floyd Square, the area not too far from where you are, where George Floyd was killed, that people are still deciding kind of what to do with that area. And I know this is very early on, and this is about, obviously, Renee Good. But what is your sense for what people are saying out there about what this area is beginning to signify?
Well, I would say it's really similar to what, George Floyd Square looked like in the early days. I want to talk a little bit about what these barricades are made out of. There's these, wooden, like flatbed pieces of wood, but then there's also a ton of garbage dumpsters, neighbors' garbage dumpsters that are lined up. I walked over there earlier before I got on air with you, and someone brought out, a large, long ice chest that I would assume was in someone's basement. There's, bonfires going up. I think it's going to be, it doesn't look like these are barricades that are going to be coming down anytime soon. There's a very, community-led feel around here, people passing out food, people passing out tea, making sure people are okay. But I think I think this is going to be really similar to what we're seeing with, George Floyd Square. And like many of our listeners know, that, there's still questions about what to do with that, with that space. And, we're still not sure what's going to happen there. I think this could be it's a similar feel right now. Who knows what will happen, but yes, lots of the barricades are up, and I don't think they're going to be moving anytime soon.
And Ellie, in terms of the neighborhood impact, this is not very far from the George Floyd site. So, a lot of these people who live in these houses were kind of on edge in those days and nights that followed. Have they talked about this being kind of a reopening of a wound at all?
Definitely, yeah. I've talked to a few people who just are in complete shock. I was also at the vigil last night and talked to a bunch of folks, some of whom were Latino living here in the Twin Cities. And, I talked to this one woman last night who's just like, this feels like 2016 again, where I was worried about my family members every day. And there's a lot of fear, and it's just a lot of reopening of new wounds.
Ellie, thank you so
much. A lot
much.
of PTSD. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep,
thank you very much for your reporting. We've got to turn now we're going to talk with the mayor of Chicago. So happy to have Brandon Johnson with us. Mayor Johnson, thanks for taking the time today.
You're certainly welcome. Thanks for having me on.
We were just wondering, when you put out a video yesterday in solidarity with Minneapolis, and you were talking about some of the situations that you have faced in Chicago, and we just wanted to hear from you. What message would you send to the people of Minneapolis right now, having gone through some of what you've gone through in Chicago?
Yeah, well, look, the killing of Renee is absolutely abhorrent, and it certainly does shock the conscience, and it should invigorate, quite frankly, the sensibility and the consciousness of our country and our land. And look, having gone through very similar circumstances here in Chicago, whether it was a father dropping his children off to school, and Silverio Villegas Gonzalez and was shot by federal agents, or another woman who was shot 5 times, even though she survived. The federal government lied about what happened, and the truth inevitably came out. But these circumstances certainly parallel, and I wanted to make sure that Mayor Fry and the entire people of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota know that the people of Chicago stand in complete solidarity with them, not just in spirit, but in action and deed.
Mayor, this is Brian Baxt. We heard from the governor not long ago, and he kind of reflected what First Lady Gwen Walz said to him is, when will this end? You've been kind of earlier in the process, and we've seen over the course of the year that some of these same agents move from city to city. Does it just taper? Are you still in the feeling like your city is in the mix, or how can you let people know about what might come in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, well, look, we're still in the throes of this president who has declared war on working people across America. And as a former social studies teacher, I remember when we had presidents who declared wars on poverty. We don't have that situation right now. And, the president has used ICE and federal agents as his personalized police force to enact terror and fear and division around this country. My heart continues to ache. Just yesterday at a high school here in Chicago, again, ICE agents indiscriminately continue to use chemical weapons and to create and causing that much more terror in our communities. And so, I believe that, as we come together in this moment, and that's the message that I've, charged, Chicagoans with, is the message, that, I sent to Minneapolis, that we have to come together. We cannot allow the soul of our consciousness to be ripped apart because of this tyranny that's coming from the federal government. Never in a million years would I ever imagine, as mayor of the city of Chicago, that mayors across this country would have to defend our cities against the federal government.
Mayor, I know you have to go in a minute, and we so much appreciate your time. One of the concerns as well in community, in addition to the killing that happened yesterday, is the idea of kind of immigrant businesses and neighborhoods that have higher significant populations of immigrants having long-term impacts because people are either afraid to go to work or people are afraid to be patrons at those businesses. And your surge, I guess, started back in the fall. So I'm wondering how things are now, because a lot of Minnesotans are thinking about the longer-term impact.
Yeah, that's right, Nina. So what we have seen is a couple of things. One, we know this is not about safety. It's certainly not about immigration, right? Because where these federal agents were in our city, violent crime actually worsened with federal agents being present. And then the other point that you raised, it has had an impact on our social institutions and our economy. People have been afraid to go to the local grocery store, the local restaurants, individuals who work and serve, our city as, strong contributors to our society. Their lives have been disrupted. What we have to do in this moment, we have to use every single tool that's available to us, whether it's, executive orders, which I've signed multiple executive orders to protect Chicagoans, legislation, litigation, and most of all, organizing and expressing our First Amendment right. We have to petition this government to show up for working people. If we do that and we come together, I'm still hopeful that we can get to the other side of this and ultimately beat back against this tyranny. But it's really going to require all of us working class people around this country to stand firm on our values, and that's not allowed this country to be turned into, a nation that concentrates its support to the haves, and then the rest of us are bearing the brunt of harmful policies that are coming from this administration.
Mayor Johnson, thank you so much for your time and for coming on Minnesota Now. We hope we can check in with you again sometime.
Let's do that. And Happy New Year, you all, and let's continue to stay strong. And our thoughts and prayers and our actions will be surrounded in this moment to protect working people and stand up for the people of Minneapolis.
Thank you very much. That was Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson.
Support comes from Mall of America, featuring their holiday rewards. Points are accrued from shopping, rides, dining, and attractions, now through February 28th. More information at the Mall of America app.
Let's head over to Emily Reese for some more top news headlines. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Nina. Protesters gathered today outside a federal building in Minneapolis in response to the fatal shooting of a woman by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer. Today, protesters shouted "No more ICE" and other chants as Border Patrol officers pushed them back, doused them with pepper spray, and fired tear gas. The unidentified ICE agent shot 37-year-old Renee Good in the head yesterday. State and local officials have demanded ICE leave Minnesota, but Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says that's not going to happen. Protests have erupted in Iran's capital following a call by the exiled crown prince for mass demonstrations. Witnesses say people shouted from their homes and rallied in the streets today. The protests, which began over Iran's struggling economy, have spread nationwide. So far, at least 39 people have been killed, more than 2,260 detained, according to the human rights activists' news agency. However, authorities have not fully shut down the internet as they have in past protests. The Senate has advanced a resolution that would limit President Donald Trump's ability to conduct further attacks against Venezuela. Today's vote was a disapproval of Trump's expanding ambitions in the Western Hemisphere. Today's action to advance the War Powers resolution ensures a vote next week on final passage, but the measure has virtually no chance of becoming law because Trump would have to sign it if it were to pass the Republican-controlled House. House Democrats are introducing a similar resolution. NASA says it's canceled the year's first spacewalk. It may bring its crew back early from the International Space Station due to a medical issue. The spacewalk was supposed to happen today, but was postponed because of an unspecified medical concern with an astronaut who wasn't identified. The space agency says the crew member is stable, although NASA is considering an early end to the mission. The latest crew has been on the space station since August after launching from Florida. Nina.
Emily Reese, thank you so much. We are in the studio for Minnesota Now. For anyone who is just joining us, I'm Nina Moyni. I'm here with politics editor Brian Baxt. We are following the story of 37-year-old Renee Good, who was fatally shot by an ICE agent while inside of a vehicle yesterday in South Minneapolis. There have been very conflicting narratives coming out, and we are just watching Vice President J.D. Vance, who's talking about this, commenting on it right now from the White House. He's very upset. Brian, what strikes you about what J.D. Vance is saying compared with what some of the witnesses we talked to are saying?
Well, he came out and he slammed a headline he read, and I think on CNN, that he said that there's outrage after a U.S. citizen was shot, something to that nature, and he said that that the person who was under assault was the officer. He said, quote, "She was trying to ram this guy with her car. He shot back. He defended himself." And so they are not giving any ground on this notion that the officer was at risk and fired in under justification. Of course, the video is being assessed by all angles, by all kinds of people. You can see it on our website if you want to watch it for yourself.
Yeah.
So, but this is clearly an indication that the White House is going to stick with this very aggressive defense of this officer, and he said that he cares about law enforcement and and enforcing the nation's immigration laws.
So we are keeping up to date on what everybody has to say. Thank you for that summary, Brian Baxt. Now we want to turn to another journalist that we're really fortunate to have on the program. We know that the scene, 34th in Portland, has been closed off with man-made barricades today. Our Ellie Roth was describing spray paint on a large wooden pallet that reads, "Protect the living and honor the dead." Again, communities have been actively engaged in protests and civil gatherings to remember 37-year-old Renee Good. And this morning, federal agents, we know, were using some chemical irritants to push a protest line back near the federal Whipple building that's just outside the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. And that's where ICE has set up a base of operations. So part of the local outrage stems from whether or not the federal officer that shot Good had the legal right to do so. That is what different politicians are weighing in on. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem and Vice President J.D. Vance claiming that Good had used her vehicle to try to ram into agents. Multiple witnesses again at the scene. And even Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said it's clear from the video that that's not true. We have the video at nprnews.org. So here to tell us more is NPR correspondent Martin Costi. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon, Martin.
Hi, Nina. How are you?
I'm doing okay. We are trying to sort through all of what is happening right now. And when there are such conflicting narratives, it's hard to navigate the sharp contrast in what is being said. Can you start by talking a little bit about your reporting and how officers are trained for a situation like this? Is it different for ICE agents?
No, it shouldn't be different. And I'm going to take my headphones off because I'm getting echo back, and I hate to hear my own voice, so I'm going to take those off.
A true journalist.
So there is training, and then there is the legal precedents. I guess I'll take them in reverse order. The legal precedents for situations like this is mainly, it hinges on a Supreme Court case from 1989 called Graham v. Connor. Every police officer has been trained on it, and it's about sort of the idea of objective reasonableness, an officer's perception reasonably of the situation, of the threat to him or her and other people at the moment of using deadly force, and specifically shooting into a car like this. And it really comes down to whether there is an objectively reasonable perception that the driver of the car is about to kill someone or cause grievous bodily harm. And that's really the test. And training, I will say, for decades now has been don't even get into that situation. Don't shoot into moving cars. Don't position yourself in such a way that you would be hit by that car. If you can step away, step away. I mean, I'm looking at some other documents here, like the federal policies that bind ICE agents in terms of use of force. And it says quite quite black and white here. Deadly force may not be used solely to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect. The only exceptions would be if the person in the vehicle is threatening the officer or another person with deadly force by means other than the vehicle, or if the vehicle is operated in a manner that threatens to cause death or serious physical injury. In other words, what Secretary Noem says happens, that the car is being used to ram someone or about to ram someone. That's, of course, her version of what we saw there.
Martin, Brian Baxt here. Good to talk with you again. You know, I want to pick up on one of the points you made, which was the positioning of the officer. We know from the video that he comes around the side and is in the path of what would be the vehicle. Is that something that officers are trained to not kind of be in what could be the lane of exit?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to explain there, is that good training, up-to-date training for both federal and local officers is to avoid. You certainly don't step in front of a car. I mean, it's different if someone is aiming at you in a way where you don't have time to react, but certainly you don't create the situation where you're putting your body in front of the car. When these things go to court, when there's a lawsuit, the experts tell me that you might prevail as the officer if you're sort of dead center to the car and there's really no time to step away. But in this situation, I mean, I'm no legal expert here, and this will be litigated for sure, but certainly the officer firing the weapon here was not dead center to the hood of that car.
And what about the idea of footage? You know, it doesn't seem like ICE has routinely had body-worn cameras, as many law enforcement agents do around the country in state and federal and even local law enforcement. We saw there appears to be something in his hand as though he might be recording. Do you think we'll ever see that video?
I won't predict whether we'll see the video of the camera he was holding, presumably a phone, anytime soon, especially if it's, the active investigation is a way to, if there's a Freedom of Information Act request or some FOIA, as soon as something's under investigation, that's off the table for the time being. I mean, at some point during that court case, it would be an open court. So I don't predict seeing that soon. In terms of wearing a body camera also, the Biden administration was moving toward putting body cameras on federal agents, and that seems to have stopped or at least slowed down significantly under the second Trump administration.
Martin, one of the things that some of our public safety officials and from our state police, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, were talking about was this idea that they've often worked together with the FBI and that it helps things move more smoothly. The BCA and saying that they're not even going to have access to, any evidence. They weren't able to be at the crime scene, so there's nowhere to go. But it's my understanding that Minnesota could still try to prosecute. What could that look like? Is this a dead-end road?
They could try. It would be very difficult, but there may be reasons to try, even if it's mission impossible. Legally, there's no reason they can't try. The federal government would likely try to move the case to federal court under the Federal Supremacy Clause. That's happened before. But certainly it would not be unprecedented that local jurisdictions have tried to prosecute federal agents, and that it's not prima facie off the table, but it would definitely be challenged and it would become a legal fight.
What about some of the commentary outside of the investigation? We've seen the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, we've seen the President, and now we're watching Vice President Vance talk about this in pretty certain terms, that this was a clear-cut case of self-defense. Is that unusual?
Certainly not unusual to hear people, whether federal or local, talking about this as self-defense, even if the case isn't that clear. I mean, that's positioning. I wouldn't guess how well that would hold up in a legal proceeding. But certainly, people making broader claims about self-defense after one of these shootings, that's nothing new.
But in terms of like the political leaders putting their stake in the ground that this is an open and shut case, even though we're not even a day into this investigation.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I'm delayed a little bit. I'm putting my headphones on and off, but I think I hate to weigh in too strongly on whether this is unusual, but yeah, it is unusual to make this clear a statement. Usually I think what we're used to hearing is, let's let the facts get sorted out. Let's let the investigation happen. That's usually the boilerplate we hear, not this was simply, quote unquote, domestic terrorism and end of story.
Is this something that you've seen in other states? And, we had the mayor of Chicago on a little bit ago. What are you seeing kind of trend-wise, if there is one?
Well, trend-wise, I think we see a rapidly expanding presence of federal officers. They've always been doing immigration enforcement to some degree, but it's ramped up so radically, and it's done in such a sort of spotlight way, designed in some ways to get attention. I think we're seeing the stress of that action when local authorities that are not cooperating, especially in states such as Minnesota, where local police are not cooperating with the feds. We're seeing the kind of political stress that comes out of that.
Yeah. So at the national desk where you work, I'm assuming that you have seen other kind of legal challenges and cases. I mean, when you say that they can still try, what do you mean by try? What does that actively look like?
Well, if the state were to try to, it would be an uphill climb, obviously. They don't have the same access to evidence that the feds would have. But, they could still try to. The BCA said they're not going to try that, but conceivably they could try to gather their own evidence, try to interview the same people, that kind of thing, and then it would just be sort of trench warfare, I think, legally in terms of whether that case, whether the federal government could invoke federal supremacy clauses and get that moved. I think it would be an uphill climb. Maybe there would be, even if it ultimately was doomed legally, there might be some expository value to the state doing its own investigation.
All right, Martin, I wish we had more time. Thank you so much for sharing your reporting with us, and we hope we can check in with you again sometime.
It's great to talk to you. Miss Minnesota.
Oh, thank you. That was NPR correspondent Martin Costi, who covers criminal justice.
Support comes from Theater Latte Da's production of The Glass Menagerie, Tennessee Williams' story of family, longing, and desire. Performed as the playwright intended with musical underscoring. February 4th through March 1st. Info and tickets at latteda.org.
We are joined now by Nekima Levy-Armstrong, a Minneapolis civil rights attorney and a longtime advocate for criminal justice reform. Thanks for your time this afternoon, Nekima.
Thank you for having me, Nina.
So we are talking, for anyone who's just joining us, this case, 37-year-old Renee Good shot and killed yesterday in South Minneapolis by an ICE agent while in a vehicle. And there is this video. We have it at nprnews.org that people can go and see for themselves. There are these very steadfast, different conflicting narratives occurring right now about what happened. Was Renee Good a threat to the ICE agents, or was she just trying to drive away? Nekima, having heard the news that we just heard, that the FBI will be the sole agency investigating and the state will not be able to investigate, the state BCA, what do you make of that?
I think it's business as usual on the part of the Trump administration in terms of putting out lies and refusing to adequately investigate this case before making public statements, trying to blame Renee Good for her own death, which is truly unconscionable and despicable. I really wish that the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension would have stood their ground in this situation and made a decision to investigate as best they could, because they're not precluded from investigating. They would not have access to all of the files and information, but they could still interview witnesses. They could still review any video evidence that's made available to them by bystanders. We don't even know if there's body camera footage available, for example. And so they're making a conscious decision to not push back against the FBI and to stand their ground on behalf of Minnesota residents, which I think is really disheartening. But they're also not the only potential investigative agency in town. There are other law enforcement agencies that could potentially investigate as well. But again, I'm sure that, number one, they don't want to go against the Trump administration because of all of the bullying tactics and vindictive things that we have witnessed and experienced in Minnesota and folks around the nation. But beyond that, I'm sure that they're concerned about whether they would actually have a complete record to present to the county attorney.
Yeah, it sounded like, Bob Jacobson, the commissioner of public safety, was saying that they weren't even at the scene, that they wouldn't be given access to files. Governor Walz seemed to be making more of a plea and an ask to have some ability for state police and the BCA to work together with the FBI, as he said has been customary in the past. One of the things, Nikema, I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you're a person who takes action and you have a list of things that you say that can be done. Sometimes people are feeling, looking around saying, what can people do? What are the actionable steps that might be able to come? Like, what should they be asking their public officials for? Will you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've identified that you say are actionable that can be done?
Yes, I would say that one of the things that's actionable is for Congress to claim oversight of what is happening with ICE. They're the ones who approve the budget. They're supposed to have some oversight of what's happening, and they're essentially laying down on the job. But Congress can do its own inquiries into this particular situation, and they can make the decision that they're not going to add $100 million to ICE's budget without clear answers on their protocols, who these people are, who are running around, with masks on, claiming to be immigration enforcement. We don't know what kind of training these people have. Some suggest that they're bounty hunters, and clearly they lack proper training based on what we all saw yesterday with regard to the shooting death of Renee Good. They did not follow their own procedures in terms of the DOJ's requirements around shooting into a moving vehicle. And so there are a lot of questions about the qualifications of these individuals and the amount of power and authority that they have. And so Congress needs to conduct some real inquiries as opposed to writing a blank check to the Department of Homeland Security to continue these operations that we know are just wreaking havoc on our community and American society as a whole. And I would say beyond that, I don't want to see Governor Walz pleading. I want to see Governor Walz figuring out a way to make an investigation happen at the local level. I think that people would be satisfied even with some partial information rather than just trusting the FBI to conduct a fair and impartial investigation when we know that they're already aligned with Kristi Noem and Trump, and there's literally zero chance that they would take this matter seriously and conduct a full, fair, and impartial investigation. So I'd rather see our governor, our state, and the BCA fight for what's right on behalf of Minnesotans instead of rolling over.
This is Brian Baxt. As we're speaking, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, is in the White House rebutting what he thinks is a false narrative out there about this case. And he said that this was a tragedy of our own making. And he said, lay off our ICE. Do you expect these observers to back down at all? Or do you think this will only galvanize the opposition to the ICE?
Absolutely not. Not here in Minnesota. I think we are strong. We are resilient. And we're consistent. We've had a sustained fight for justice in this state, calling for police accountability, people going out, protecting their neighbors in the freezing cold, and literally putting their lives and bodies on the line to stand up for what they believe in, which is the rule of law, which is justice, and not fascism and authoritarianism. And as you can see, just this morning, thousands of people showed up at the Whipple federal building where these federal agencies are temporarily housed to show their resistance to this oppression that's going on. So, no, we're not letting up in the state of Minnesota, and I hope that other states will continue to stand up. There were many protests around the country last night calling for justice for Renee Good. So we know that we have allies in other states who see what's happening and who are actively resisting this authoritarianism as well as the domestic terrorism that's being inflicted by ICE.
Nikema Levy-Armstrong, wish we had more time, but we have to wrap up the show. We hope you'll come back soon. Thank you for your time.
Anytime, Nina. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Nina Moyni. That is going to do it for Minnesota Now today. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio, Brian. I'm curious to know what is next for the politics team immediately and for Brian Bax, because you've been busy.
It's hard to predict. This whole week has just been a blur to me.
All right. Well, we are going to be, again, going through the information we have. Go to nprnews.org for consistent updates. Starting today at 3 o'clock, you can also tune in to All Things Considered with host Clay Masters. Thanks for listening.
Programming supported by St. Paul Academy and Summit School, whose pre-K program focuses on lifelong learning and creativity. Now accepting applications for 2026-2027. Learn more at spa.edu.
You're listening to NPR News 91.1 FM KNOW Minneapolis St. Paul. We're at 35 degrees, cloudy skies. There is a chance for some light rain this afternoon. Could turn into a chance of snow in the later afternoon, but temperatures are going to be in the mid-30s, so not too bad. Tonight, there is a chance for snow in the evening and after midnight. Lows will be in the mid-20s. Tomorrow, your Friday is looking sunny, again with highs expected to be in the low 30s. Not seeing precipitation Friday night, but seeing some perhaps patchy freezing fog. The sidewalks have been icy to say the least, so be on the lookout for the refreezing that's occurring. It's 1 o'clock.